thank you so much for all being here today. It's a great pleasure to be able to actually be in the same place, and I've spent many hours online with all of you, many hours watching videos of your beautiful children teaching or learning through a concept-based approach. So I wanted to be able to bring you together to talk about the CBI Mathematics project. Both you, Dani and Michelle, were involved in writing this for a good few years before we launched it. And now, Cheryl, you have the opportunity to be teaching it in a school where you've got Michelle as a maths coach. Aren't you lucky? Amazing. Amazing. So I just thought it'd be a great chance to be able to share some of your reflections, some of the journey that you've experienced and the impact that it's having. So Dani, let's start with you. How is the CBI Maths project different to other approaches to teaching maths?
I suppose the biggest difference is that it has a complete scope and sequence of conceptual understandings, which is mapped out from K to 5, and that provides the teachers with a really clear progression of students and how their mathematical understanding will progress. And that's the first I've seen of that, which provides so many advantages for both teachers and students, provides consistency across the school. A lot of the time, we were only just talking before as well about the fact that teachers, we come into our classrooms, we're often in isolation from each other, know the topic, and we go, okay, what's in our toolkit? And sometimes maths is not always the most comfortable curriculum area for teachers. We haven't learnt from an understanding base. So this, the CBI Maths project provides us with that complete scope and sequence, which allows not only the students to engage in deeper understanding, but it also is there for teachers and to support them in building their understanding. So that is quite a significant difference in the CBI project.
One of the things I heard recently is the teachers are spending more time teaching maths, which is, if nothing else, that is a positive outcome.
Yeah. And I think because they don't have to take so much time trying to find what should I be teaching, how do I teach it, where are the resources, the CBI project has provided them with all of that in one nice package. And I think to build on that, the conceptual understanding is the focus, but I really like the inductive way that it's written. So students are required now to do the heavy lifting, whereas we're not telling them, we used to do, we are learning to, and put them on the board, we are learning to add 2-digit numbers or something. But now we're not giving them those understandings first. We are scaffolding their learning with carefully guided questions that require them to unpack patterns, look for patterns, commonalities, and draw their own conclusions and therefore come up with their own generalisation or their own understanding. And I think the other bit I love is the transfer. Yes. It really tells us, that understanding and transfer really tell us what they do understand.
Yeah. Definitely. I think also something that was very important as we were writing it was to think about it from the perspective of the teacher who's not confident. So there is all of those extra anecdotal notes there directed specifically to the teacher, which might address maybe a misconception that you might see present, and it's really important to note that, and this is how you can go about flipping that misconception.
And the guiding questions as well, from being that teacher, who, didn't have a strong maths background and breathed a bit of a sigh of relief when maths was over for the day, I'm really looking forward to maths, and I've got that pathway, that framework, and those guiding questions that really help me get a picture of where the children are at and their conceptual understanding. So that's a huge part of it, is the scaffolding for teachers as well.
Definitely.
But it still gives you agency as a teacher, doesn't it? I think that was one of the concerns that we had at our school. Oh, where's my agency as a teacher? Just get involved in the project and have a look, and you will see that there is still a lot of opportunity for your own agency as a teacher.
Because you're not spending all of that energy in worrying about what's the next step, am I guiding them in the right way, you're actually free to be creative because you've got that clear pathway, and so it's that safety net of I'm doing the right thing, but I've got this great idea because I know my kids, or I saw somebody else do this, I can pull this in, but I've got a big picture of the journey that the children need to be taking.
And that sort of transitions it from here's a great activity to this learning engagement would help them to understand that. And so it becomes much more intentional about, do I just want to do this because it's fun and it loosely fits with the topic, to, oh, actually I want them to understand this, and I can see that there's a little bit of a misconception here, so I could use that. Or when we wrote the CBI Maths project, it was always intended to be suggested learning experiences. We were also hesitant of that very prescriptive curriculum. And many teachers do follow it as it's laid out, but others say, oh, I'm just using the understandings and the questions and I'm doing different learning engagements. Well, great, that's fine. But the nice thing about that is if you're doing different learning engagements, you've still got the same understandings as the teacher in the class next door.
Because you're following that roadmap of the guiding questions and the understandings, I find my focus as a teacher is much more on the learning than what we're doing to get through maths time today.
It's that rigour, isn't it? It's just added that bit more rigour, I think, to other programs that I've used before. In fact, a lot more rigour, a lot more conceptual understanding when you're unpacking a concept before you learn about it. You can't learn about pattern if you don't know what pattern is.
Yes, absolutely. And I've noticed too, and some of the feedback that I've been hearing is there's much more awareness of assessment in an ongoing way. So the emphasis in the CBI Maths project isn't on a summative test. There's quite a lot of thought that goes into the pre-assessment, but it's actually every time that students generalise that we see that as a piece of assessment. And even in the video that we'll share at the conference where was your class and they were working on this idea of symmetry, there's almost a second lesson to it where you're like, they don't quite get it yet. They're not ready to generalise yet. I can see they're not ready. And so I love that kind of reflective and ongoing assessment aspect that's happening, to be like, I know where I want to get them to. It's not just the activity is done. They didn't quite get it, so I know what I can follow up with.
And we've found that a lot, haven't we? And the value of the transfer activities, because the children will write their generalisations, fantastic, and then you do your transfer. Hang on a minute, let's get your book back out. What did you write? Now, have a think about that. And so they're constructing that meaning based on what they've done in all those exploratory investigations, what they've come up with, and then they'll start questioning. That doesn't actually make sense. So I find those transfer activities really, really valuable in helping us know what the children are thinking. So it's valuable assessment because you're like getting a little window into their thinking.
I think also the other thing I found, I don't know if you've found it, but it's really a step away from just procedural learning, not just learning the procedure behind addition or multiplication, or as you move up through the curriculum, it's really about that understanding.
Yeah, so unpacking the why we do what we do as mathematicians. Yeah.
And I think that empowers children. I might be jumping ahead, but it's like that whole before, when it was a procedure, oh, I'm not very good at maths because I always get my answers wrong. Whereas now, because they're constructing meaning, I feel all of my children believe in themselves a lot more as mathematicians, and they're empowered because it's part of a process, and they're sort of thinking along the lines of, like with reading, a good fit. We choose a good fit book. We don't just go and choose one that we can't read all of the words. Well, the same with maths. We want to find an activity or an engagement, inquiry that fits where we're at, and they want the challenge because they know that struggle's how their brain grows, rather than I got it wrong and I still can't do this. So it's much more about using their thinking and coming to that place of building an understanding.
I was actually here, I heard back from a school just last week, and they were saying it's making the biggest difference for our girls seeing themselves as mathematicians. And I was like, that's exciting. That's exciting to hear.
Because I think too, one of the things that maybe turned some girls off before, because there was that procedural, I can get the right answer. Girls want to be creative. I'm being very sexist, but you know, girls enjoy that thinking process, and so I think that I find the girls in my class really like they're explaining, they're writing, they're explaining their understandings, and it's got that more creative element to it. So
yeah, tell us a little bit more about the impact on students and their agency in the classroom.
Well, I think, like you were saying at the beginning, Dani, a lot of maths programs have got a sequential scope and sequence, but they don't put that understanding component in. So I feel like the children are able to use that base of knowledge and skills as tools within an inquiry framework. So then they feel this sense of working toward understanding. And I think it's quite empowering for them to have, through inquiry, they're developing language. So then they've got language and reasoning that they can use to share their understandings. And I think that makes them feel like they're mathematicians and not, you know, and also they love it. They love the hands-on. You could argue that's part of lots of the maths we do, but the difference is that they're starting to use their strategy to be the winner in the game rather than I won, that was a lucky break, because they're using those understandings and thinking, bringing that to how they're going to play and how they're going to be the winner.
Yeah, absolutely, becoming much more strategic.
Yeah, so it's really empowered them, I think, as learners.
I think it also challenges the students who naturally get maths. So, and it kind of brings those students who might take a little bit more time, because naturally it is a bit more of a time, is required, and it allows those students to do the thinking a little bit more. And the students who naturally get the processes, actually it encourages them to do the thinking, which then challenges their own understanding of the process a lot of the time, which I find is a really cool thing as well.
Yeah, because sometimes they can do it, but they can't necessarily explain it.
They don't know why,
so,
what they do. They don't know why they do what they do.
And again, that goes back to why the transfer is so important, because why are we learning maths? So that we can apply it to real world problems. Well, if you just rote learn and you have a process, it doesn't work so well when you're confronting it in real life. So, yeah.
Michelle, as a maths coach, you now have children almost cheering when you walk in for maths.
I do have children that cheer when I walk in the classroom.
Which I think is just incredible and testament to that shift in attitude that we're talking about. Or when you came to the workshop with me and you're away from school for a few days, they were so disappointed that you weren't going to be there.
No, they were really disappointed. It's like, oh, it's all right, I'll make it up when I get back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that attitude to mathematics is something that we want to be celebrating, and that in itself is a win, that students actually love maths again and don't. It's so easy. I saw the shift that sort of tends to happen at sort of the year 4 or year 5 level, where kids suddenly go, oh, I'm supposed to hate maths. And so some of that is starting to reverse as students go, no, but I do love maths because it's creative and it's solving problems, and it's not just about this right.
When I've been interviewing some of those students, they're like, oh, I used to find it really hard, but my teacher does it differently this year. And I'm like, oh, well, tell me more. Oh, well, we play more games, or I get to work with other people in my group, or I'm always working with someone different. That's nice. So it's really interesting when you talk to students and ask them what they think about learning maths the way they're learning now, and it's all positive. And even sometimes I did an interview the other day, and this young lady in grade 5 said, oh, we do a mess about, but I didn't like it because I didn't know how to do it. And I was like, oh, good. So, it's a nice challenge. We're really, as you said, it's evening the playing field a little bit, I think, for students that were really strong procedurally. Now they have to think. And because she wasn't used to that, she's like, I don't know what to do.
I'm not sure what the right answer is.
I know.
And in the mess about there isn't
exactly.
one.
There isn't one. Whereas other children that I've interviewed as well, they're like, oh, I really didn't like maths, but now I really like it and I'm learning and I know this and I know this and I know this. And they're telling me all the things they understand now as opposed to before. So it's really powerful when you just listen to students tell you their feelings about maths now. And I think I love that. I love going in there now, and I love the way that students are so engaged and how teachers are getting on board. And, you know, it's a challenge in the beginning, right? It's a challenge. You're suddenly, right, we're going to do this whole new program. And we were lucky we had the whole school, elementary, on board. And it was a challenge for some people because it was a real shift in thinking from that deductive to inductive approach, and the pre-assessments are different. They're not the traditional procedure, 2 + 2, 3 + 3, you know, get the answers right. There's a lot of big differences, I think, in the way we're teaching maths in the pilot project now. And that takes time for teachers to get their head around. But you've got always your early adopters, and then, you know, generally people have all come on board, and you might have 1 or 2 resistors, but because we're doing the math project this year and we're doing it next year, because we've got a math coach, they can't help but get involved. And then when they see their students responding in the way they are, you can't argue with that, right? You can't argue with student enthusiasm and improved outcomes.
And you have team meetings now that are focused on math specifically, where they are bringing student generalisations or student work samples. And for a long time, for me, in an IB school, the focus of team meetings was always on a unit of inquiry. And very rarely did we spend a whole hour talking about what was happening in maths. That was the bit that, like you were saying, that was the bit that you went back to your classroom and shut your door, because it wasn't an intentional avoidance of maths. It was just we had other things going on. But the fact that you've got whole team meetings, tell us a little bit more about how those team meetings are going.
Yeah, I mean, you start out slowly, of course, because it's a new change for everybody. But now we're at the stage of we look at the pre-assessments before we give them, and we have a discussion in the grade level. Well, what is it that we are expecting our students? What do we think they're going to answer? What is it that we want them to answer? But then we also look at afterwards, what did they answer? And did they meet our expectations? Why not? So that's really powerful as a moderation tool, but also really powerful of getting teachers on the same page, as opposed to everyone just gives the assessment, everyone marks it in isolation, and then off everybody goes, because we need to have a shared understanding. So we've started doing those sorts of things. We've started tracking our data, building spreadsheets, so we're putting that pre-assessment data into a spreadsheet. Then that helps me look for patterns as a math coach as well. Are there things or understandings in here that none of our students are getting? Let's have a look why or why not that might be. It gives you lots of interesting information when you start tracking that data as well.
But even you start to have those just valuable collaborative conversations that are really informal as you shoot through to the person next door to go, oh, I tried this one and my kids really didn't get it, and I thought they would, but I tried it this way. And so, you know, for example, number operations, so I'm teaching grade 1. We looked at the material and we thought, phase 2 will be super easy. But hang on, let's have a look at the assessments. Actually, we're doing a lot of work in phase 2, and having that common experience with your colleagues reinforces what you're doing, and just building that shared language, I think. So I love where we're going with looking at the pre-assessments before, so that we can, again, that strengthens teacher understanding of what to look for, which then you take back into your classroom, because it's so much about listening in to what the children are saying. But I think over time we're going to see this become richer and richer as we develop the shared language, the shared way of doing things, and we record. We'll see a very different impact to what we're seeing at the end of the first year, where it's building enthusiasm and confidence. But I think the data will start to come through and reflect that teachers are on the same page, that you go into a new class, but it's easy to get the starting point, and it's also really easy to see where the little gaps are and to hotspot and fill those in. Yeah.
So what advice do you have for schools who are thinking about, should we adopt the maths project?
For me, that's an easy yes, you should. But, you know, I'm already a convert. You know, go slow. And take your time getting to know it, get to know the project, get to know how it looks, and be prepared to have to change your mindset about how you've traditionally taught maths in the past. If you do adopt the project, then it's reading through the whole learning engagements before you start. It is not something you can just pick up and start teaching. You do have to read through, you do have to engage with it, you do have to be prepared. You have to find resources, or we've provided a lot of resources, so you do have to be prepared. But you need to give it a chance for your students' sake, I think. Take your time. Ideally, you would have a maths coach, because what it does allow for those rich conversations to happen, it brings that maths planning and maths learning to the forefront again, like we do with units of inquiry or writing or reading, but it's now bringing that as an equal playing field, right? Maths is just important as everything else. And, you know, don't be afraid, because we talk about conceptual understandings, and mathematics by nature is conceptual language. But we haven't lost our skills and knowledge. Our skills and knowledge still underpin our understandings. So don't think that we've lost that.
These are tools that the children need to be able to use to build that conceptual understanding.
And Cheryl, what would you say to a teacher whose school has just adopted the project?
Well, if the school has just adopted it, excellent, you're lucky. If your school hasn't adopted it, I'd try really hard to get a colleague on board, but I'd still go for it, because, you know, there's a lot of support. It's going to impact the way you teach, it's going to impact the way you think, and it's definitely going to impact learning. And the other thing that I would add is, with the going slow, is also not being afraid to use your professional judgment. You don't have to follow step one. You know, it's there as this fabulous framework and guiding document, but it's not prescriptive, and so you are still the teacher who knows your children, and I would just say just do it.
And also, you know, when you can go, actually we've got that understanding, we don't need to go through all these learning engagements, or like we saw in the other lesson, we've done the learning engagement as planned and they still haven't got it, we need to spend some more time here. So that exercising that teacher judgment is so important. Well, thank you so much for being here today to share your experiences and your wisdom and your journeys with us. It's always such a great pleasure to be able to come together.
Thank you.
Thank you.